Hey, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Hey, welcome to 1111 in downtown. I'm going to come up here. Uh-oh. Mute me for just a second. Oh, is that what that is? Okay. I wondered what that was. Okay. Hey, listen, I'm working up here today for a little bit. This is going to be, just mute me. I'll talk in this microphone for a second. There we go. Yeah, I'll do this for a second. Hey, couple of announcements real quick. Glad to have you all here this morning. It's good to see you all on a nice hot day. If I were you all, I would have stayed home, except that my air conditioner isn't working. Well, it's working off and on, so it's good to be here. Turn over on the back. While you're filling out registration forms, make sure you fill that out. If you're visiting with us, we really want to know that you're here and want to welcome you for being here and keep in touch with you. On the back, several people were asking about this after Jaretta spoke with us last week, and people were asking, what is the Methodist Church doing? And I always recommend that you go to the United Methodist Church's website, umc.org. Very easy, and there's all sorts of information about what the church is doing in dealing with a number of crises around the country and at the border, as well as what we're dealing with human sexuality and the general conference and decision that will happen in February. So there's all sorts of good information there. I also recommend people go to the United Methodist Church's Insight, UMC Insight. But what our own bishops here in the state of Texas have a campaign they started 2 weeks ago called Right to unite parents and their children. For those immigrants at the border whose children are being detained or whose families are being separated, there's a campaign for that. It's information on the back, and I hope you'll follow through with that. Some people were asking, what can we do now? Well, certainly that's something you can do right there. Also, our Mission Sundays, all throughout July, we're collecting skillets for the mission. And then this Monday, Sharm, will you be here this Monday? Okay. Wine and wishful thinking will happen on Monday. Oh, that's right, yeah. Okay, so wine and wishful thinking will not be happening this Monday. Okay, I'm actually thought that we would have that covered, and I apologize we don't, so it won't be happening. Just make a note of that, because I'll be out of town on vacation. So I think that's all of our announcements for now. Let's begin with our welcome candle.
The welcome candle is lit. Please join me. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again.
I know it's not your trash. Everyone is fundamentally lonely. Sometimes it comes out as rage. Screaming in a store, they're lonely at the core. So be calm when you engage. Everyone is fundamentally lonely. I'm not saying to sacrifice. Lend some support at the airport. It won't kill you to be nice. picking up something someone dropped will make this whole thing less horrendous. Everyone is fundamentally lonely, even ones pretending they're not. Be nice today, it'll make things just slightly okay. On this lonely little blue dot.
May we pray? God of many names, God of many faces and places, God of wanderers, God of music and fun and sadness and loss and hope and healing. We are happy to be here today to connect with you through each other, for we know that we all live in you and you in us. And so we give thanks for this time of connection. We give thanks for every life here. We give thanks that we have the opportunity to know each other a little more, to listen closely, to look into each other's eyes, and to be God to each other and for each other, for your name's sake. We thank you again for this time, and we look forward to what may be next. In the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Amen.
If y'all want to stand, we're going to sing our offering song together. You may be watching from a safe distance. You may be so close you can taste the blood. You may have head for higher ground. You may be drowning in the flood. No matter what you do, love will find you. You may have lost what little faith you had. You may believe with all your heart. You may be pulling yourself together again. You may be falling apart. No matter what you do, love will find you. One of you sees that love's a long lost friend. One of you can recognize her face. One of you runs open arms. One of you falls down in disgrace. See a million different gateways home. You may think there's only one way through. You may be waiting for the kingdom to come. You may believe it's in you. No matter what you do, love will find you. No matter what you do, love will find you. Love will find you. Love will find you.
Hey, everybody, I want to introduce to you Stephanie Horde here. Forgot to mention her. Good time to introduce her. Stephanie's filling in for Brad while he's out this Sunday and again later on this summer, so we're glad to have you here. You lead over at the Galileo service?
Yes, I do.
The Galileo, some of y'all know about the Galileo service, a church which is over in Mansfield, an amazing program. Check it out online. And you can go there if you want to. It's Sunday evenings, so you're welcome to do that. You can get double doses, fun stuff. Take a moment, greet one another with signs of peace. Make sure I introduced you. So we're doing All Shall Be Well instead of Out Beyond Ideas. Yeah, but it'll be up there. So just to introduce that in a minute, just to have everybody come, just kind of say, we're going to sing this song to get ready for Kairos. Yeah, it's on the, it's not on the bulletin, but it's on the board, on the screens. Yeah, they'll sit. Yeah. Hey. My zipper's undone.
All right, if y'all want to take a seat, we're going to be actually singing Anam Cara. It's not in your bulletin, but it'll be up on these screens, so sing along.
Gifts of the morning we open to all of the gifts of the day. We open our hearts
To take it all in and give it all back in our way. Let us sing of the beauty around us. Let us sing of the beauty within. Oh, hear the earth tell that all shall be well. Anam Cara, soul friend. We're part of it all in our sorrow. We're part of it all in our bliss. We're part of the sun and part of the rain. We're all part of God's holy kiss. Let us sing of the beauty around us. Let us sing of the beauty within. Oh, hear the earth tell that all shall be well. Anam Cara, so friend.
And now we'll continue this quiet time. And for those of you who are new among us, this is Kairos time, a time for us to stop between the last thing and the next thing. And it's a holy time, as all things are, but it's a still holy time. So please sit in your chair comfortably. Perhaps close your eyes if that's good for you. Straighten your body so that you can really experience your breath. Take some deep breaths and some slow exhales. Find a rhythm to your breath. Now, as you continue breathing, maybe think about this question. What is the next good thing you will do to assure that all will be well? And may we all find peace. Amen.
So here is a reading from Ephesians. So then, remember that at one time you, Gentiles by birth, called the uncircumcised, by those who are called the circumcised, physical circumcision made by the flesh, by human hands, remember that you were at that time without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ, you who were once far off have now been brought near by the death of Christ, for he is our peace. In his life, he has brought both groups together. He has broken down the dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace, and might reconcile both groups to God in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. So he came and proclaimed peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him, both of us have access to one Spirit, to God.
So I've titled this sermon, Rock, Paper, Scissors, Peace. I'm going to borrow your stand here for a moment, Claire, and then I'll give it back to you after. How many of you played that game before, right? Rock, paper, scissors? Everybody sure? Yeah? Okay, we're going to play it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and we're just going to, remember you do this 1, 2, 3. It's always the argument was like, is it on 3 or is it after 3? See, even now, Lord, we cannot agree. So we're going to say, I'm going to go ahead and be the authority here and say that it is on 3. 1, 2, and then you do whatever it is. Rock, paper, scissors, right? All right, so, and if you remember, rock smashes scissors, scissors cut paper, paper covers rock, right? Yeah, okay. So here we go. Turn to somebody. Ready? Remember, you got to do it with your hands. Here we go. Okay, best 2 out of 3. So get the best 2 out of 3. Okay, now, if you'll stop for just a second. Now I want you to turn to somebody who you don't know, and you're going to play the same game, only this time the loser loses $100. No, I'm not serious, of course. Yeah, no. Just pretend like you lose $100, okay? So turn to somebody you haven't played and do that. Rock, paper, scissors. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I remember playing that game at camps, and I remember playing with smaller children at some of the camps where I went to, and there's this one kid that whenever I'd play, and if I ever won, he would say, my rule, we play, I get to try after you make your move. Because whenever he lost, it was like, I don't lose. I just don't. That's not right. I always win. I'm the kid, you know, and I'm also at a camp, and I have cancer. So I mean, you know, he was kind of, that's not really what he said. But you know, he had this particular kid, actually it was several kids, but this particular one was just so funny. If I won, he'd say, okay, my new rule, and then he'd just say, I get to do it after you do it. But here's the thing, right? I mean, who makes the rules? Who makes the rules? That's really the thing. And we could look at this statistically. I didn't get online to sort of do an analysis to see. It would have been interesting to see what are the odds that most people, lose every time they do this, which is almost always kind of, for me, what happens. But the reality is, in this game, it's like a lot of the other kinds of games that we play, that we define sort of who's in or who's out, or who wins or who doesn't. We have all these implicit sort of rules that guide us. And we live by those rules. And it's a little bit like rock, paper, scissors, except that it's not so playful because it's implicit. When I was driving through Germany, I think I shared the time that Linda and I were visiting with Emily and Tim and the two girls, or actually it was just Molly at the time, and not little Maeve over here. But when they were living there, we'd gone into the Czech Republic, and coming back across the border, it was late in the evening. I was driving along the windy road. I passed through the little village. There was a yield sign in German. I forgot how you say it in German, but it was a yield sign. And so I slowed, and I looked up the right, and I saw a car 200 yards away, maybe more than that, and I kept on going and drove on out of the little village. And about 10 minutes later, I noticed a car pulling up behind me. But it's like tailing me. And so I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm going too slow. I speed up a little bit. It gets a little closer. And so I finally start to slow down, and it comes up beside me. And this has been 15 minutes now. We've driven out of this little town. And I'm slowing down, and the car doesn't pass. It slows down with me. And the guy on the right rolls down his window, looks at me. Tim's in the back seat. I'm driving. Tim's in the back seat. He speaks fluent German. Emily speaks fluent German, and so does Molly, in fact. And so he rolls down the window. He says something in German. Tim starts laughing and then apologizes in German and then laughs some more as he's rolling up the window. I notice the car pulls in front, then turns around and goes back to the village. Tim said, "Dad, you're supposed to wait 30 seconds at a yield sign. You didn't wait." Now, in Germany, there is this sort of orientation around rules. And it's been kind of a cliche and sometimes a little bit of a stereotype, but it is pretty true. There's an adherence to rules. You don't cross the crosswalk if it says don't cross. There might not be cars for 10 years. You don't cross. Rules are here for a reason. But the reality is sometimes our rules, sometimes our implicit boundaries, sometimes our rules become so implicit that they're less understood and they're more enforced on the basis of fear, on the basis of our anxiety. So we want order. And yet, when they say if there's no order, is it just pure chaos? I love that, because I love that idea. If we didn't have these rules, it would just be chaos. One of my favorite things to do is to go in, when I used to go into schools and do assemblies as a touring artist. And they would line up the students in nice, neat rows, and they would sit at opposite ends, one teacher here and one teacher there, and they would bring the children in, and they would have them sit appropriately. Now, get back in line, Johnny, back, Johnny. And they would get them into these wonderful, wonderful square designs. And then I'd walk up to them, and I'd go, "Okay, everybody, let's get in a circle." And you could just see the teachers running around going like, "We don't know circles." And it was just a moment of chaos, right? It was a moment of chaos. And guess what the kids did? They settled down. They settled down. They didn't have a neat, perfect 360 circle. It was kind of a spiral, messy circle. But they settled down, and they all looked forward, right? We sometimes assume chaos. We sometimes assume disorder. We sometimes assume danger, Will Robinson. We sometimes assume that our fear is correct. And so we put up a wall, or we put up a boundary, or we create a little dividing line in our mind towards others. And who knows how it got there or how long it's been there, but we create these things implicitly, and they become defining motivations for our life. And sadly, they become like rock, paper, scissors, right? Because eventually, nobody wins. It just goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the walls get higher, or the fences get thicker, or the moats get wider, or the anger gets more tense. You read about the horrible story that happened in Clearwater, Florida this last week, about the fellow that was arguing with someone who had parked in a handicapped parking. I don't know if you read this. And when her boyfriend came out, she saw the guy yelling at his girlfriend in the window. And he walked over and pushed him away, and he hit the ground, pulled a gun, and shot the guy in the chest. And the sheriff's department rules it defense, self-defense, right? Stand your ground kind of thing. They're still dealing with it. My thought was, how did it get there? Right? How did it get to that point? How did we get to this point where we are in our culture? How did this happen? Because right now we're operating out of implicit rules and out of unspoken and unconscious rules, and we're no longer operating out of consciousness. When Paul was writing to the church at Ephesus, he was writing about the rules don't apply anymore. We're no longer in the temple. Jesus taught that our relationship is what God is about, that we are now part of a larger community. As the words say, we are now one, all one, whereas once before, maybe you were over there. Maybe you were over there. I mean, he made against ourselves, right? And here the chosen are now supposedly opening the doors to these pagans, to these non-Jewish people. And they're now welcome. And Paul makes the funny little side comment that says, yes, that's true. You were the uncircumcised. These are the circumcised. Don't forget, they were circumcised by human hands. It's a little bit of a slight there, just to remind them God's bigger than all of that. But that was the challenge, right? The other. And they are not just like other people. They are totally other. And Paul is, well, it's not really Paul. We don't know who the author is. We know it's probably not Paul. But this author is saying the community is wider than me and you, or us and them. How do we get there? He uses the word peace 4 times. How do we get there? So I want to share with this story that I heard a long time ago. I heard it at a storytelling festival back in the 80s when I first started getting kind of involved with that community. And it's always stuck with me as an interesting story. There was this farmer, and he had a neighbor whose farm was just kind of up the hillside, and they didn't have a fence between their property. They were pretty much regulating their livestock pretty easily to themselves and keeping things to themselves, and didn't interact with one another too much, but friendly. You know, kind of like neighbors down the street. They'd wave and they'd see each other working in the farm. One day, one of the other calves wandered over to this fellow's farm, and he didn't really recognize it as a different calf, and he kind of kept it in his herd until that farmer over there came looking for it and started accusing him of having stolen the calf. Well, that created this animosity between them. He said, fine, take it. And the fellow took his calf back, but now there was this rift. There was this distance. Now they had reason to distrust each other. And so the farmer across the way put up a fence. And one day, one of the farmer's calves wandered over to that other farmer, broke through the fence. And so the farmer decided this time to put up a bit of a stream, a creek. Dug a literally creek in the ground, and then from one lake down the hillside created this creek. So there was a creek and a fence. And this animosity just grew and grew. They would hardly look at each other. They sometimes would gesture to each other rudely. One day there was a knock on the door, and this young man had come to the door, and he asked if there's some work he could do around the place. And the farmer said, yeah, there is, in fact. You see where this fence has gotten broken up? Well, that fellow over there built this fence, but I want you to go and I want you to reinforce it. Just go ahead and reinforce it. If it need be, then just build a fence on this side of the creek and make it twice as strong. I got to run into town, but if you do that, I'll pay you good. And so he went on into town, and that fellow got the tools out of the shed and went to work. Later on that afternoon, when the farmer came back, he saw that the shed was all closed up. Tools must have been put away. The guy must have been done with the job. And as he walked around the farmhouse, he looked off in the distance, and instead of a fence there, the young man had built a bridge. And then to his surprise, he looked over and saw that other farmer coming with that calf back across the bridge. And so the farmer ran and met him halfway, and the fellow across the way says, I don't know what got into me. Maybe this is your calf. I mean, who would have thought, what a move to build a bridge in spite of all of this anger. And the only thing I could do is to come back over, and let's see if we can't figure out what's going on. And so they began their relationship anew. And when I heard this story, I used to think, well, this story is this great story about, Christians are called to be bridge builders. That's our call, is to be bridge builders. But I thought there's really something else going on here in this story as well. I mean, this story is as much about building bridges, but it's also about how we see things, right? It's also about the way in which we choose to see one another. Because neither of them were willing to see each other as themselves. They always took the stance of the other. That person is the other. I was listening to On Being here last week. There was an author there. His name is Luis Alberto Uriel. He teaches English at Chicago University. He's written a number of books. But he was speaking on behalf of sort of the thinking about the south border, the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And he's made a number of trips down there. And so he was talking about his experiences there, especially along the Arizona side. It was interesting, he said, it's so easy for us to look over at someone else and assume that that other person is completely different from us for whatever reason. But he said, if you travel to the other side of the border and you look at the wall on the south side of the border, he said it's fascinating. He said in the larger sections that are all concrete, if you go on the other side, in some sections they have mariachis playing. And on a lot of the sections they have beautiful artwork all up and down the wall. Some of it is a critique. Some of it is a message of hope. Some of it's just celebration. Beautiful, beautiful graffiti and pieces of artwork all along that side of the wall. He says you'll find ice cream carts and food carts moving along in different sections. He said there's actually one section that he was down in Arizona where they were playing volleyball back and forth over the wall. Krista Tippett said, why don't we ever hear these stories? And he said, right, why don't we? So yes, there's a wall, but he said it's interesting. If you go on the north side of the wall, it's barren, it's concrete, it's steel. There's guards walking up and down or driving their vehicles back and forth or dogs moving back and forth. He said it looks like East Berlin. And then he looked at her and said, we've become East Berlin. We've become the Russian side of the wall. It's an interesting idea of what happens when you build walls. Are we preserving freedom? Are we entrapping ourselves? So I'm going to push us past the idea of fear for a moment. What would happen? What would happen if we did the only thing that Jesus asked us to do, and we try love first? In all encounters, love first. That person shouldn't be parking in that handicap zone. We did a funeral here a couple of weeks ago, big funeral. I watched a number of Mercedes and a number of Alfa Romeos pull in. I saw an Alfa Romeo SUV, a big one. I've never seen those before. I saw a Bentley SUV. They all pulled into the handicap zones and parked. And then they reached around and hung the little handicap thing up in the mirror. And then they got out and walked to the deal. I felt such righteous indignation. I'm out there directing traffic. I wanted to just walk over there and go, no, you can't do. I just felt such, judgment. But the reality is that I have no idea what else is going on. A couple of the situations clearly needed it. But out of the 8 parking spaces, there was some abuse going on, perhaps. What would that have helped? When there was somebody else that came along needing a handicap parking, because that's why I was there to try to help people get to handicap parking, I just helped them park along the curb close up to the church. I just found other spaces. I just improvised. What would have happened for me to confront the situation? What does it mean to start with love? first. The first response is love. That's the challenge, I think, for us, is to see how we might respond first with love. So my brother Mike and Stan, some of y'all know my future brother-in-law, Stan. Stan, are you in here? I saw you. Okay, you're in here. And I know you don't want me to talk about you. But hey, I'm celebrating because my brother Mike and Stan are getting married in August. And I'm excited. I've said this before, when Stan and Mike joined the church, and my brother Mike has never joined the church, and it was such a moving thing for Mike to join this congregation. But as I've said before, Stan has been a godsend to our family over the years, and they've been together for 12 years now, and maybe a little bit more than that, and we're just excited. Linda and I will be there. Of course, we're not allowed to do these ceremonies, but there's a wonderful church up there in Creed where this is happening, a UCC church, and we'll be involved in some ways and stuff, celebrating and being a part of that. But here's the interesting thing. I was in Atlanta, right? I was at the Wild Goose Festival last week up in North Carolina in Asheville. Wild Goose Festival of Arts and Justice, sort of centered around Christian faith, emergent Christian church, but also all sorts of folks there. There are people in every spectrum, atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Christian, evangelical, recovering evangelical. I mean, the whole gamut. Millennials, boomers, post-boomers, everybody was there. And what was interesting was that as I made my way back to Atlanta for the next morning so I could be here last week when Jaretta was speaking and run the band, I got up really early, right? I got up at 4:30 in the morning to get back here. And so I'm at the airport in Atlanta, and I'm at the tram station from the hotel to catch back to the terminal. And as I'm sitting there, I see this other guy coming. There's nobody in this tram station at 4:30 in the morning. Here comes this other guy, a black man, and he's got a suitcase behind him, and he's dressed in a nice sort of African-looking shirt, you know, and he's just huffing, and he's kind of hurrying up to make the tram, and he looks at me and he says, "Got to make church this morning, I'm the preacher." And I laughed at him, and I said, "So am I got to make church too." You know, and then I said, I'm at First Methodist in Fort Worth. He said, "Well, I'm at New Waverly Methodist in Baltimore, in the D.C. area." And we chatted for a little bit, and then I just asked him as we got on the tram, and I said, "So how are you all dealing with it?" He's African American, right? He's in an AME church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and he says, and I said, "How are you all dealing with it?" You know, stupid me. I'm talking the human sexuality issue. And he looks at me and he kind of looks with a question, and he says, what do you mean? And I said, in February, what we're dealing with the decision in February, what direction we're going to go with the discipline. He looks at me and he says, "I'm in Baltimore. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. My people fully embrace whomever one chooses to love." He said, "That's not our problem. We're getting killed in the streets. We're getting oppressed right and left. We're dealing with racial injustices." And then he says to me, "And you know what? I can't even get the other evangelicals to meet with me to talk about how we can deal with this issue because they're still caught up in what the Bible says about sexuality." And it just hit me how hard it is for us to address one another from the place of love. So much so that others might even die around us, and we're still looking past it. How is it that we go about being peace in a world that continues to tell us life is all about rock, paper, scissors? Well, we have our teaching in Jesus, we have our teaching in Gandhi, we have it in Martin Luther King. If you go back and you read the Birmingham jail letter that he wrote, "Injustice for anyone is injustice for all. There is no peace unless we are all experiencing peace. The only way to deal with darkness is to drive it out with light." Or as Gandhi would say, the only way to deal with creating peace is to be the change you want to see in the world. Or then what Jesus said, which was quite simply, love one another as yourself. And here's how I want you to realize this. Here's how I want you to think of this. Not love one another as you wish somebody would treat you, because to be honest, we all get treated really nice. We don't have to worry about how we get treated. So if we go around saying love one another as you would, love another as you would love yourself, it really doesn't say much. I want to suggest that you hear it this way: love one another as if the other is you. As if you and the other are the same. That's harder to do. That's harder to start from the place of love. I want to end with this little thought, and I'm going to invite the band to come up here now as I finish some things up here. Mark Nepo, who is a great writer, and he's kind of a Buddhist writer, but he's a great writer, and he writes some wonderful ideas, and he once wrote this, he had this little section where he was talking about how difficult it is to get to that place of peacemaking, because in presence of others, in the presence of the strange, we automatically feel these barriers. We automatically go to the rock, paper, scissors, Whereas the real response of Jesus is there are no rock, paper, scissors. That's not how we relate to life. We simply relate to life as peace. And we participate in peace. And we love one another as ourselves. Literally as ourselves, as the other is us. That's all that's required. And yet that's hard to do. It's hard to get past that. And Mark Nepo was saying that how do we get to that place where we experience that paradigm shift? That all of a sudden, I do see you as me. I don't immediately watch the person parking in the wrong parking space as a judgmental call. But my first response is, I wonder why they did that. I wonder what they need. Why would I park there if I was having to park there instead of where I should be parking? We see it from the perspective of love first. How hard is that to do, right? It really is a challenge. What might have happened in that parking lot in Clear Fork in Florida, or Clearwater in Florida? And I think about the first time that we moved into our house. And we moved in the house I now live in, that has been plagued by Stephen King plagues in so many ways. If you saw my Facebook posting, I pulled out a beehive this large yesterday. I didn't, somebody else did. I repaired the wall. But that's the third time we've had bees in our house. I mean, thousands of bees. But the first month that we were there, we moved in 20 years ago, and I used to live in this house 15, 20 years prior to that. I moved out at high school. My mother sold the place, and Linda and I bought it again after we graduated in 1999, and moved back in, and the tree in the 15 years or 20 years since I'd been gone, the pecan tree in the back had become this enormous, beautiful tree. Just gorgeous tree, 100 feet high, 7,500 feet wide, branches reaching across the yard in every direction. The second floor of the house, if you looked out the windows, you looked like you were in a tree house. The tree was just surrounding and embracing that house in gentle waves as you'd watch the branches, and you could look at the wildlife inside it. There was a swing that hung from one of the branches, and now that lowest branch was so high that you had to climb up on the wall to the side of the house to get on the swing, and you could swing halfway across the yard like you were on a zip line, back and forth. It was just beautiful. The boys loved it. It was wonderful. And we were there for 6 weeks. And I went off on a trip to do some travel and some touring, and I came back one night late. Everything was shut down. The house was dark. Kids were asleep. Linda was asleep. There was a note in the den, which is towards the back, and it said, "Before you look out the window, take a deep breath. Everything's fine. We're okay." Well, now when I read that, I immediately ran to the back of the window in a panic. And I could see already there was some light illuminating the backyard. The moon must have been shining, or the stars were really bright, and I looked out, and there was this 10, 12-foot trunk, and it was probably 3.5 feet in diameter, and at the top of that trunk, at about 12 feet, the rest of that tree had literally snapped over and was laying all across the neighbor's roof. Completely snapped off. Well, I found out the next day that a wind shear storm had come through, and the thunderstorm and the wind shear had caught that particular neighborhood, and it caught that particular tree with all of its beautiful branches and leaves and pecans, and it just gently snapped it and laid it over on the neighbor's house. Didn't even hurt the roof. It just was such a gentle fall. But the tree was completely unsalvageable. And when the arborist came by the next day to kind of survey the whole situation, he looked at me, and it never really occurred to me what a profound message it was. He said, sometimes things are beautiful. Sometimes life can be so filling, but you have to remember that you have to let go of stuff. You have to thin things down. You can't dance with the wind if you're weighted down by all sorts of stuff. Unless you thin it down, the trees won't dance. I thought, what a powerful image, unless we thin it down. My sensei in Aikido would have said that here's the way you approach Aikido when you're dealing with a match. And this guy was 70 years old when I was taking from him back when I was 18, 17. And he was, in those days, flipping people half his age, twice his size. They'd walk up to him. He'd just throw them off in different directions. He just knew how to twist something in this way or twist something that. He almost always did sort of a gentle dancing movement like that. And people would go flying. And I remember being so amazed by this that I wanted to learn this technique. And I won't forget what he said. He says, you know what the best path to peace is? And I said, what? And he has said, look for the conflicts before they happen. And then invite the others to walk away with you. That's what we're invited to do as Christians. That's what we're invited to do as people of creation. As people who have to learn to dance with one another, or we find ourselves with higher walls. How is it that we can try to see the conflict before it happens? How is it that we can approach each moment with the words in our hearts saying, I love you, before we think of anything else? Amen.
Everybody needs someone to hold on. Take my hand. I've been a lonesome man. Took a while to understand. There's some things we can't live without. A man so prone to doubt. Faithful are the wounds from friends. So give it just a little time. Share some bread and wine. Weave your heart into mine, my friend. Walls fall down where there's a peaceful sound. Lonely souls hang around. Don't be shy. There's nothing left to hide. Come on, let's talk a while of the places we left behind. No longer yours or mine, but we could build a good thing here too. So give it just a little time. Share some bread and wine. Weave your heart into mine. And if I fall alone, but you can help to bear the load. A threefold cord is hard to break. was wrong. Everybody needs someone to hold on.
Thanks for being with us, Stephanie. It's been good to have you. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. So let's all stand for a blessing. And for our blessing this morning, I'm gonna send you off with the last part of a poem by Luis Alberto Uriel. And his poem is entitled, "You Who Seek Grace from a Distracted God." And it starts with that line, and then it ends with the line, "You are not forgotten," which is a beautiful way to end that whole idea of this. So everyone's a little bit lonely, and yet we are here to hold on to one another. So take somebody's hand if that feels good for you too. Some of y'all are already doing that. But I want to just read you a beautiful section of him as he was standing in Tijuana. And I've had this experience. I've been to Tampico a couple of times when I was working there with some of the schools. And you can apply it to standing at any square in any point in your life this week. And I think you'll find it applies. In tedium, you stand there and you notice you walk silent, perhaps counting your manifold sins, your doubts. You walk to the plaza and stand. In the crush of your family, these children heading for trade school, there's the wheelchair man, the woman and her shopping cart, the nodding hooker with blue tears on her cheek, the paisanos, ibarachos, ticos, boricuras, chicanos, apaches, tayanos, habaneros, Cariocas, Mayans, tattooed cholo, samurai, and inscrutable leaning back, hushed as that one watches you. And you want to. You really want to. You are bursting with it. You are burning with it. You have no words. You want to cup their cheeks in your hands. You want to hold their faces between your palms. You want to say it. So say it. Say it. You have nothing to lose. Just say it. I love you. 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 Amen.